Hello, everybody, and welcome to Week 11, Day 3 of the Hearthstone Global Games. My name's TJ, and joining me on the casting desk is Kevin Hovdestad. How you doing, man?
Great, TJ. It's real good to be back. I'm very excited to be joining you tonight for the beginning of Phase 2 of the Hearthstone Global Games. This is the first week of the second phase. We have a ton of really great games coming up tonight. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, if you're used to the Thursday broadcast, we actually have 3 games tonight, but we'll get into that in just a moment. In the meantime, let's go ahead and take a look at the format for the Global Games. Stage 1 just concluded, which was a 10-week round robin. 48 countries competing with 8 groups of 6 teams apiece. We've cut that in half for Stage 2. We now have 6 groups of 4 teams, and it's just a 3-week round robin. After this, we're going to cut it to 16 teams who are going to compete in a single elimination bracket where the top 4 countries advance to the LAN finals, which is coming up pretty shortly here. We're starting to get towards the end of the Global Games, and all these matches are pretty important for these guys.
Yeah, specifically for Phase 2, it's interesting because we're only eliminating 8 teams, right? So 2/3 of the teams left are going to advance to that elimination bracket, and every game matters because you want to get out of this group stage.
Yeah, and we'll go through the groups and show you guys the standings now for Phase 2. We've had 2 days of matches so far. And for Group A, Malaysia sits on top, while Singapore had a really rough loss. That's going to be a tough one to swallow for them moving forward.
Group B right now, the United States and the Czech Republic have both won their first matches, knocking out Israel and Belgium respectively.
And in Group C, the Netherlands, a team that a lot of players had as a favorite, especially for this group, sit on top at 1-0. But we're going to be seeing Argentina and South Korea today.
And in Group D right now, New Zealand, with a flawless win, a 3-0 game record over Hungary, leads a group where we're going to see the second pairing between Brazil and Taiwan tonight.
Yeah, important match there. Group E, Greece, I think a team that I always surprised by the wins because it feels like they're always arguing with each other on their comms, but we're going to get to see how that group is going to shake out with Peru at the bottom.
And in the final group, Group F, Italy and Mexico have taken the lead. Canada, alas, has fallen behind. They're going to have to claw their way back after that very close loss to Mexico.
Yeah, the Rogue Mirror was a game. If you guys didn't catch it, I believe it was yesterday in the broadcast. You can go back and watch the VODs. That matchup was pretty intense. Of course, we've just spoiled the result, but the games were really intense, and it was a fun matchup to watch. Unless you're Canadian.
Yeah, it hurt me a little on the inside. Yeah. But obviously, big congratulations to Mexico, who were kind of an underdog going into Global Games as a whole. No one expected them to go quite as far or with quite the success that they have.
Yeah, definitely a team to watch. But let's go ahead and take a look at the schedule for today and the matches that we're going to see. We're going to start off with Argentina versus South Korea. Then for the second match, Brazil versus Taiwan. And we'll round off the day with China versus Norway. And for the first time on our Thursday broadcast, we're going to get to see a European team with Norway competing, so that's going to be an interesting one for me, especially since both those teams had some success in the Phase 1, have some big names on their team, so we're going to round off the day with one of the biggest matches.
Yeah, China versus Norway, probably the most exciting matchup for me because they're the 2, I would say, strongest teams in that group, which does leave kind of an interesting question of which one of them is going to cement themselves as the stronger of the 2 moving ahead.
Yeah, and of course, the first match of the day, Argentina versus South Korea. Of course, South Korea has a ton of big names on their roster, but Argentina also has some players that are moving through and having a lot of success in the Americas regions. So PNC, Snail competed at a championship last year. Now Guidan is also a guy who, if you watch competitive Hearthstone for the past couple years, in those Latin American events, he's been having a lot of success.
Right, and South Korea, honestly, a lot of these guys need no introduction. Kranich, someone we've seen compete all the way up to BlizzCon in the past. Handsome guy was winning back-to-back seasonal championships last year, and Dione also very successful just this year earlier.
Yeah, just this year, and he sort of is in that transition from being sort of a funny and entertaining streamer into a more competitive player, and he started out with the Winter Championship last year for the HCT, and he's just been improving ever since. So, but here's the beautiful countries themselves. I feel like all the casters say that every week, but we're going to continue to say it because it's so darn true, Kevin.
Yeah, it's actually kind of fun, I think, to see a little bit of the sort of view of what these countries actually look like, where these people are coming from. South America, obviously, there's just a ton of natural beauty, and Argentina represents that well. Totally conversely to that, though, the mecca of esports, the home of competitive gaming in many respects, South Korea is just a bustling metropolis.
Yes, it is. And South Korea is, I've never been there, but it is on my list of places that, on the top of my list of places that I'd love to visit and see. But Korea, I think Hearthstone is one of the esports that they've yet to dominate in, which is pretty interesting. They've had some success with players, but they've yet to have that domination that they've had in other ones.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think there's probably more advantage in some of the other more active games, whereas in a mind game like Hearthstone, there's something to be said for the opportunity that presents to other players. Looking, though, here at the lineups, real briefly, just for those of you who haven't necessarily followed Hearthstone Global Games up to this point, each team has to bring all 9 classes. They're shown here in pairs of 2 all the way down for the first 4 matches, except for the Ace match, where one player can now repeat, and they can utilize that 9th class or the class they didn't use earlier when they played their first match. And it looks like we're going to start with PNC on one of Rogue or Warrior against Flurry on one of Rogue or Shaman.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to see what they're going to pick. There are a lot of mind games that happen when it comes to deck selection, but of course it is a best of 5 and we are using Conquest. Each player basically picks one of their 2 decks at the beginning of each game that they're going to play. So that's where those mind games sort of come in, where you have 2 classes, you're looking at your opponent's 2 classes, and you have to decide, well, which one of my classes or which one of my decks has the best matchup against my opponent's 2, or which one do I think they'll pick, and then which one do I go with? And we actually have the picks now. It is going to be Rogue for PNC and Shaman for Flurry.
It's interesting. There's kind of some next level things that have to happen there for you to decide what class you're going to run. And I feel like both teams also obviously have to think about the order of their players and the decks, trying to maybe game the matchups and get the matches they want. If you're South Korea in this position and you get to take on Rogue, which we're going to assume at this point is a Quest Rogue deck, with a Shaman deck that I'm going to presume is probably one of the token styles that's out there right now, that's a really good matchup. That's exactly what you want to have going up against Rogue.
Yeah, even if, Pirate Warrior has slightly edged out the Taunt Warrior in popularity in the global games. So if you assume that it's Quest Rogue and Pirate Warrior, the Token Shaman has good matchups against both of those decks. So they just use sort of the process of elimination. Now, granted, we could be seeing things that are completely different. We could be seeing a Jade Shaman. We could be seeing Nizal Shaman. We could be seeing Miracle Rogue. There's been a list that's been floating around recently. I was watching Ant stream, Ant, a player from the Americas who had qualified for the Spring Championship in Shanghai. He had a lot of success with sort of and I want to call it an aggro rogue.
Okay.
But it's just very low curve, runs Leroy Shadow Step for sort of that finisher. It's really interesting. And I know a lot of players experimented with that at the beginning of Ungoro to not much avail because Quest Rogue and Miracle Rogue have better matchups across the board. But it could be something that's a little interesting. It has a lot of different matchups than the other 2, where it does hold its own against aggressive decks.
Yeah, and I will say the one thing that's really interesting about the global games format as a whole is it does allow you to bring decks where you can maybe have a little bit of the element of surprise, try some things. And you know what? There is definitely a little bit of an element of surprise here, to me at least, in looking at Argentina with a Vilespine Slayer showing in the mulligan.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a Miracle Rogue from Argentina. So that's going to be pretty interesting. And South Korea just looks like they're playing the pretty standard Token Evolve Shaman. The list that's been running around has been pretty much 30 for 30 cards, the same across almost every player that's brought it, every player that plays it on ladder. It's once you know what it is, it's very easy to pinpoint every single card in the deck.
Yeah, and it is very consistent. Like the teams that have brought it to global games, the players who have been using it on ladder or in other tournaments recently, it is. You're right. It's almost exactly the same. But the only tech choice that maybe gets made is some people will occasionally add a single copy of Lightning Storm. They'll look to have that a little bit of additional removal. In this matchup, given that we now know that it is the Token Shaman specifically with the Evolve package, because that is one of the things that has changed. Not everyone is running that. Do you think that this is a favorable match for South Korea?
I still think it's still favored for South Korea. Devolve does work against Miracle Rogue. You have an Auctioneer that gets left alone on the board. You make a Giant Van Cleef that gets left alone on the board. Questing Adventurer gets left on the board. Devolve's going to hit those pretty hard. Now, Arcane Giants, if you can get those down, those aren't very susceptible to it, but it relies on you getting on the board early and keeping control of the board. Rogue, while the Miracle version does run Fan of Knives, it is still pretty hard for it to deal with a pretty wide board, and it's still pretty hard for it to deal with early aggression. It just has a little bit better time at it than the Quest Rogue because it does run removal spells like Eviscerate. It can, chew through those early boards and then solidify itself in the mid game. And right off the bat, South Korea doesn't have a good hand at all. No early minions to play besides patches.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the one thing that obviously there are lots of pros to the current token shaman list. It's very popular. It's very strong. One of the cons is it does have the potential in a situation exactly like the one we're looking at right now, where you end up with a handful of spells.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff, and if you clog your hand up with these spells, Evolve and Devolve feel really good on developed boards, but on undeveloped boards, they're not powerful. Bloodlust obviously requires a meaningful board presence, and that's going to create some challenges as well.
Yeah. They do draw the Firefly. Now, one of the things about these decks is, that while they do have built-in failure rates, like you talked about, sometimes they can draw the dead hand, the Token Shaman runs a ton of early game. So you're very likely to hit early game minions. It's just, can you hit it in time to play that sort of, swarm style that this deck likes to play, especially against Rogue, who's vulnerable to that type of play. And the one thing about the Token Shaman is that even if they do have a rough start, the Doppelgangster plus Evolve can come down and completely swing how things go, because it's a 2-card combo that makes, most of the time, a pretty giant board.
Right, and the challenge here too, now that we're kind of starting to see how the game is going to develop for Argentina, is this is not the hand state that you want as a rogue when you're trying to take advantage of a weak early game from a shaman. A series of 2 and 3 drops, a bunch of spells, you're not going to get value out of a Mimic Pod on turn 3 against a token shaman. Like, what really Argentina needed here, what PNC wanted, was to develop his own board. And he's kind of forced to tempo out this questing adventure that just isn't going to stick.
Yeah, and I do like this play. I think it's sort of necessary because you have to force the shaman to play on the back foot a little bit. And Argentina has, no lack of threats in their hand. I mean, they're going to be able to play Sherazin the following turn. And the one thing about Miracle Rogue is that a single draw can completely change the landscape of the hand. All of a sudden you draw a preparation, and that you can prep out the Mimic Pod, then make a huge Van Cleef. All of a sudden the Sherazin that was killed off pretty easily reses back and becomes this, perpetual motion machine.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I think in this particular position, as the rogue player, like, yes, you do have the opportunity to hit a massive swing turn. The challenge is going to be that you need to hit that massive swing turn before South Korea develops enough of a board to go off on their own, because you're constantly playing around the threat of Bloodlust, right? We're going into turn 4 for the Shaman, and turn 4 is not a big deal, but from turn 5 onwards, you're constantly doing the Bloodlust math. And it doesn't take very much early game chip damage or very many minions for Bloodlust to represent a significant threat.
Yeah, you have to keep removing the board and then get to the point where you just hope that they don't have Doppelgangster Evolve. It's one of those matchups where you sort of have to play for the board to win and not necessarily play around every possible thing that they could use. Bloodlust is about the only thing that you can really play around, and outside of that, you just have to hope. And a second Devolve picked up. Now Devolve's good on Sherazin because it gets rid of that engine that they can keep resing it up if they have the resources to do so. But that plus a totem is really all that they're going to do unless Maelstrom Portal, unless the minion that comes out from the Devolve, really starts to make the Maelstrom Portal appealing. They can Jade Lightning this, but what else are you going to use the Devolves on? Devolve is a card that can definitely sit dead in the hand, whereas Jade Lightning has a ton of uses.
I think the fear here, though, is that if you devolve the Sherazin, odds are the resultant minion is at least a 3/3 body, right? That's statistically a fairly strong likelihood. It's going to clear your Flame Tongue Totem for no value unless you also invest the Maelstrom Portal and your existing totem into clearing it. And that's a real expensive turn just to kill Sherazin versus using the Jade Lightning here, which feels like it's more efficient, and holding on to the devolve for a situation where you're going to be able to hit not just Sherazin, but potentially the other minions as well.
Yeah, I talked earlier about how there's a ton of targets in this deck that Devolve can hit. Edwin's a big one. Auctioneer is another big one. There's just a lot of ways that you can sort of ruin a lot of resources that the rogue puts into their minions. Even if it's a second questing comes out, you're able to deal with that pretty easily by reducing a 10-10 questing adventure down to like a 2-2. So pretty good. Now, for most of the lists that I've seen from the current standard of Miracle Rogue, do run one questing because there's a lot of stuff that you want to fit in there. You can like cut a Mimic Pod, run a second questing. You can cut like man, what else? I played a ton of Miracle Rogue on my climb this season, and You know, I tried out a bunch of different things, like cutting out Hallucination, but Hallucination has like a ton of good uses because it's a cheap spell. But there is some wiggle room there.
Yeah, I think this is going to be difficult right now for Argentina just because you have this really great suite of removal in backstab into SI7, backstab into Eviscerate. There's so much potential for removal, but there's just not a lot of room here to develop a meaningful board. If they choose to go here for the Edwin, I think that's a powerful play. Unfortunately, it feels bad to play 3 of the 4 cards necessary to activate Sherazin, not the 4th, and you're only getting a 6/6 Edwin, which we know is fairly powerful in this matchup, but instantaneously going to get hit with a Devolve here.
Yeah.
Interesting to note, too, obviously, we didn't call this out earlier, but Devolve doesn't hit Sherazin if Sherazin is, at this point, not active. So the unactive Sherazin just sits and can't be touched.
Cannot be touched. It is dormant. I know there was a lot of questions about what dormant means for a board state. It's sort of a new keyword, but it's specific to one card. It's really interesting. Sherazin, though, one of my favorite cards from the set. And Mimic Pod hits Arcane Giant. Now, that's going to be great later on. But right now, not so much because they only have one spell in their hand, and that's Wind Fury. They do have control of the board, but
I mean, Wind Fury is a really, really awesome spell to have as a rogue. It gives you a lot of potential here. Unfortunately, yeah, to develop the board with what they have in hand, they can only just barely technically activate the Vilespine Slayer with the Wind Fury. The Arcane Giants are just going to sit clogging up the hand for the time being. It's a very, very interesting swing turn in the late game, particularly if you've baited out some amount of removal or seen, in this case, one or both of the Devolves get played. We know one is gone, the other one's in hand. Devolving an Arcane Giant isn't going to be super powerful anyway, but it's going to take a long time before the rogue can actually get value out of that. So if you're in PNC's position, you're looking at your subsequent turns and going, they're not great, and we're not actually able to be aggressive on the board. At best, we just get to kind of continue to try and hold on to the board state we already have.
Yeah. But as I mentioned, a single draw from the rogue can completely change things. And they do have the option next turn to be able to go Wind Fury plus Vilespine Slayer, so that's always a bonus.
Interesting here to see the Devolve come out on such a sort of minor board, fishing for, obviously, a Wrath of Air totem that they don't get, so the Jade Claws will allow them to clear the Fairy Dragon. This is okay, and given what we know about Argentina's hand state, it's actually pretty good for South Korea, but it's really ultimately not a great place for them to be in.
Yeah, this is pretty awkward. Now, granted, the Vilespine Slayer doesn't usually get too much value in this matchup outside of Doppelgangster plus Evolve. So, like, you know, hitting one of those big minions, because the deck just doesn't run many big minions. The largest minion it runs is like Aya Blackpaw. So,
yeah, I mean,
and hitting that with a Vilespine Slayer isn't even that good, because a lot of times it replaces itself with even more power. So, they are going to use the Wind Fury here, though, just to activate this. And tempo is pretty much the name of the game in this matchup. Is if you can keep their board clear, it's impossible for them to get value out of Bloodlust. They basically have to have Doppelgangster plus Evolve to get that reload. So, and Argentina knows right now that they're lacking, South Korea is lacking in resources. And they can make the read also that Bloodlust that's been in hand since the first turn. You know, it came back on the first draw after Mulligan phase, so they can have a pretty strong read that that's either Devolve or Bloodlust, or sorry, Evolve or Bloodlust.
Right, we've seen both Devolves played. Evolve obviously likely to be in the deck. South Korea does have some room here to go a little wider on the board if they want to. They can just tempo with the Maelstrom Portal because there's not a lot of targets for it at this point in the game. But even with a tempoed out Maelstrom Portal, a hero power, and a free thing from below, the board width only lasts them for some amount of time, and they are going to be threatened by this Arcane Giant that's going to just continue to clear space on the board. If Argentina can draw any number of spells here to start and activate that Auctioneer, this could be a real problem.
Now let's do the Bloodlust math. If only the thing from below gets dealt with here, which it looks like is the only thing they can deal with, there's 6 damage on board, plus there would be
18 from the Bloodlust, which is lethal.
Which is lethal. If they kill 1 with the dagger, all of a sudden we reduce that down to 5 with 15 from Bloodlust. So that's a little bit off. They would need to pick up something else. I don't even know what they could pick up at this point. They've used Jade Claws. They've used both of their Jade Lightnings. A second Jade Claw wouldn't quite be enough. So,
but But even just hitting an evolve that happens to hit one charge minion, like there's lots of little outs that could potentially activate.
Tiny little outs, yeah. At that point, I don't know if you'd go for, if you're like 2 damage off lethal and you just bloodlusted, using evolve to try and go for a charge. I mean, it'd probably be the right play just because their hand is empty, but it's a shot in the dark. And Argentina, I mean, their plays here aren't great. Dagger up doesn't seem like a good option. If they don't dagger up, they will die.
I mean, they have to be doing that math. They're looking exactly for that and saying, okay, we don't have a choice. This is a must-do. And they're going to tempo out one of the 2 Auctioneers since they have them both in hand, which does set them up for some really, really powerful future turns. Now, if you are... Oh, goodness.
This is the exact situation that we talked about. So currently they are 2 damage off lethal. There is a 2-mana minion, a 1-mana minion, a 3-mana minion. What charge minions can we get? We can get Bluegill Warrior from...
they could hit a Stormwind Knight?
Stormwind Knight from the Jade, which it's 3 mana.
Oh, they're going to trade here. This is interesting.
I don't mind this, actually, because they draw a card.
Oh, wow. That's got to hurt. That would have absolutely been perfect on one future turn, but that's not how this played out. I do actually really like, though, using Bloodlust and getting the draw off of the Mean Street Marshal. Just using that as a way to get one draw because there's so little draw available in this deck.
And also, if they go all face, put him at 2, but leave the Auctioneer up, all of a sudden 1 spell from Argentina could mean all of a sudden they don't have a board. They've used both Jade Lightnings. Basically, the only direct damage they have left in the deck would be a charge minion from Evolve or the second Jade Claws, which they have 15 cards left in their deck. It's, you know, a 1 in 15 is not something you want to put your hopes on. So they understand that they have the second Bloodlust. They just clear the board, do as much damage as possible, set up for lethal again the following turn, and go from there.
And this is going to be interesting because Fan of Knives and Vilespine Slayer is close to a board clear. I don't think it's enough, though. I think enough minions are left behind that they could actually be in a lot of trouble.
I don't know. They Fan of Knives. They Vilespine Slayer down the 3/3 and Dagger down the Wrath of Air Totem. Then there's only 2 minions on board, none of which have attack. So
yeah, I mean, it's their only out at this point. I don't think they can afford to risk like Auctioneer into Fan of Knives, hoping to hit something is just too risky.
Yeah, and they can pretty much guess at this point South Korea is out of stuff. They really don't have much reload. If they keep the board clear for the rest of the game, they've dodged most of the direct damage. If they can pick up something here, Swashbuckler, they have 1 extra mana. What could they pick up for 1 extra mana that could help them?
Could be an Earthshock, potentially?
Not a Doomhammer.
Doomhammer does not do what they want here. They still have to use the Vilespine Slayer. They have to be, again, playing around that Bloodlust math. Even though they just saw one, that is the win condition that exists in this deck, and they have to just play around it.
Yeah. And again, 3 spells. Actually, this is tough. They've actually seen Maelstrom Portal and Jade Lightning. So Healing Totem, I think, has more value for Korea here. So I think wisely taking out the Healing Totem as opposed to the Wrath of Air Totem, because there's very little things that they can benefit from the spell damage now.
Yeah, and now this is going to be interesting again, because Korea can go super wide on the board here. They're going to choose to just try this Evolve and see if they get lucky. That's a whole bunch of interesting bodies, but nothing really powerful. The Darkshire Librarian for draw isn't bad. The problem here becomes if you are Argentina in this position, you can't clear the board. You actually are staring down lethal damage, and all of the things that you can possibly do here leave 9 damage on the board.
Yeah.
There's really, I think at this point, no out for them.
Checkmate.
Even if there weren't Bloodlust in hand, I think they're playing to a losing position at this point.
Yeah, I think this is checkmate here. I don't think there's any way out for Argentina. So they could Doomhammer down 2 of the 3/2s, but then they go to 4, and there's no way that they can clear off the final minion. So they could, Vilespine Slayer into the 3/3. Swashbuckler goes into the 1/1. Doomhammer into 2 of the 3/2s. You're at 4, but there's a 3 attack minion on the board with Bloodlust in hand. So I think, yeah, that should be the game. They're gonna try and find their best way to survive, and I think what I just mentioned, plus the Shaku, is their best way to survive.
Yeah, it's the only play that gives them an opportunity to stay alive. They don't know that there's anything in hand that can possibly add additional damage. Yeah. And they can't play as if it's a Bloodlust. At this point, they have to assume it's not Bloodlust and set themselves up for the only outcome where they don't lose the game.
Assume it's the worst card in their deck, which would be...
They're going to leave 6 on board because they don't want to give up the draw, which is an interesting choice.
Yeah,
ultimately,
I like that, actually.
Doesn't matter because there is that second Bloodlust, and the first game going to go convincingly, honestly, to South Korea.
Yeah. You can see why the matchup is tough for Miracle Rogue because they struggle to deal with wide boards time after time. They were a tiny bit away from being home free. And, if that second Bloodlust wasn't in hand, they might have been able to stabilize and dodge 1 damage for the rest of the game, which is possible in this deck. It lacks direct damage with no board. 1 Jade Claws was the only bit left, but they weren't able to clear enough of the board enough times. Didn't hit the greatest target for Mimic Pod. Didn't draw any spells when they had Auctioneers in hand, so just kind of went downhill from there.
Yeah, it's tough to be stuck with 2 Auctioneers, 2 Arcane Giants after the Mimic Pod, and no spells to really take advantage of either. So currently, we've got South Korea up 1 game, and we're going to head shortly here into game number 2.
Yeah, first of all, we're going to take a look at the remaining decks. With that win, a nice choice for Shaman there. I think it would have good matchups against both, unless that was Taunt Warrior. But Ildamid versus Diane coming up next, and Priest versus Druid. So if this is an aggro Druid, most of the Priest lists have good matchups against aggro Druid because of their early game clear proficiency and Dragonfire Potion for later on in the game.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm actually kind of half expecting that this is going to be more of a Jade Druid, and if that's the case, then the matchup basically becomes, is this a Silence Priest? Do they have the hard-to-remove minions? And does the Druid have the tech for that? Because there are versions of Jade Druid right now out there that run like a single Naturalize that might allow them to take care of the first Humongous Razor Leaf, set up some way to just kind of stabilize. If the Priest goes off really early and gets the cards they need to pull off a really great swing turn on turn 3, turn 4, though, it may not end up mattering.
Yeah. It's really interesting because Priest has good matchups against most Druid lists. If you look at most Priests, Silence Priest, good matchups against Jade Druid. Not the best against the Aggro Druid, since they pretty much need a big taunt early on if they want to survive. Because a lot of times the Silence Priest cuts Shadow Word Pain.
Right.
They sometimes keep Potion of Madness because that's a secondary win condition. You Potion of Madness a cheap minion and then use that to buff up and kill. Dragon Priest, I think, does have a pretty good matchup against Jade Druid. It's very even.
Yeah, I think the Priest might actually be favored there, but again, it really comes down to which class gets the cards they need in those first 5-6 turns.
Yeah, if you can pressure the Jade Druid, that's how you beat them. But with more arm gain tools, that matchup's gotten a lot closer than it was. Dragon Priest was considered one of the best matchups against Jade Druid pre-Ungoro. Right. But things have changed a little bit. We lost Dragon Priest lost a lot of dragons with the rotation. Druid gained more health, so they can stabilize later in the game. But it is tough. I know there was a debate. There was a matchup against with USA versus Belgium, where we saw that exact matchup. We saw Dragon Priest versus Jade Druid. And there was even some debates going on Twitter which deck is favored. And I don't think there was a consensus in that Twitter argument, as is there's very little time consensus in Twitter
arguments. Yeah. Well, and so it doesn't actually end up mattering because it is the aggro Druid as you predicted, and this is going to be very interesting. Had it been Jade, it would have been interesting because I think that actually becomes a difficult question of did the Jade Druid bring the anti-aggro package, right, utilizing Wild Pyromancers, or are they simply trying to develop the fastest Jades possible? With the aggro Druid matchup, you now have to think very carefully for the Druid player about, okay, what are we going to do to establish a board that isn't going to be contested by the sequencing of all of the priest spells, particularly if they have that early Pyromancer?
Oh, it is Silence Priest. I didn't expect that. Circle of Healing is, I would say, a tech card in Silence Priest. It's not in every Silence Priest list, but it's in a lot. Because a lot of times, how players counter the Silence Priest by damaging the big minions so that you can't get those huge interfires off. Circle of Healing lets you heal them back up, make those big boards early, and basically go to town. And this matchup is tough. Again, you need a big minion early in order to use Facial Shambler, get that big taunt in the way. Or you need to just get a giant minion that kills the aggro Druid faster than they kill you early.
Right, and unfortunately for South Korea here, Argentina has drawn into both of their vicious fledglings, which is a real problem because that's a card that if you don't have that Shadow Word Pain in hand, just presents an enormous, enormous threat.
Yeah, and Silence Priest is a deck that, by and large, has cut Shadow Word Pain. It doesn't usually have room for a lot of removal spells because you need the Silence package and you need the big minion package. And a lot of times you want that consistency of draw if you get Shadow Visions to be able to pick up Divine Spirits, Interfires, Power Word Shields, in order to, make those big minions. You're very much so on a sort of one game plan type of strategy, and Shadow Word Pain oftentimes, makes your on average draws worse with the game plan that you're going for. So there could be the Shadow Word Pain if they've teched it in, but like I said, for the past couple playoffs and championships, it's been cut.
Right, and so this is going to now be interesting because I think if you look at the position that the Priest player is in, this is just very, very risky, right? You're going to get this extra draw. You're hoping to find something big to hit with this Purify. The Divine Spirit off the top is nice, but really not what they were looking for here. And every turn that Argentina gets to continue to develop a board, play the second Vicious Fledgling, buff them both up using Power of the Wild or Mark of the Lotus. Every turn that they don't clear the board is a turn closer to them being basically unable to recover this game, because they're absolutely going to need either an enormous taunt, something they can hit with that Faceless Shambler, they have both now in hand, or they're going to have to just try very carefully to maybe, if they're lucky, hit some kind of removal. I like this play, actually, from Argentina, to turn the Vicious Fledgling into a 4/4 using Mark of the Lotus. They can try and hit, maybe the additional health, something that's kind of valuable in this matchup, but it means that they're not in range of being hit by any removal spells from the Priest.
Yeah, they don't know what kind of Priest it is yet. They really haven't seen any cards, so Shadow Word Pain could be in the list. I do want to point out the heads-up play that Argentina made in the previous turn by trading in their 1/2 to play around Potion of Madness. It's, the small things like that where you're like, well, I don't want to trade this in because then you can just, heal it back up. I'm missing face damage, but Potion of Madness, just that alone would have allowed them to clear the following turn with the Radiant Elemental. So a heads-up play by Argentina. It's a small thing, but something that definitely matters.
Do you like the Liquid Membrane here over the Stealth?
I think so. The Liquid Membrane has more impact the longer the Vicious Fledgling lives. Stealth just guarantees it lives the next turn, but this also guarantees that it lives the next turn, almost certainly. And it also has the added bonus of it can't be targeted by spells for the rest of the game, where Stealth only lasts a single turn. So I do like this.
Yeah, it's a good development. I think at this point it's going to be kind of a non-issue because the Pyromancer and the Purify, I would guess, likely are your easiest solutions here to get the board cleared. You're going to have to trade some minions in to do it, but ultimately, if you're sitting in this position right now as South Korea, you cannot afford to leave this Vicious Fledgling alive.
Yeah. So Wild Pyromancer, they could go...
I think they Purify the Cleric here.
No, you can Purify the Wild... no, you can't Purify the Wild Pyromancer because you need the extra damage from the effect to reach the Vicious Fledgling. Man, that's tough.
Divine Spirit on the Pyromancer is interesting.
It just guarantees that it lives through the turn if they use both spells.
Yeah, so they go for the trades, and I guess this is okay. I expect, honestly, though, for Argentina here to just take the easy trade and slam down the second Vicious Fledgling and that Flame Elemental.
Sounds good to me.
I mean, it looks good on paper. Really tough, honestly, for Korea to be in this position where they've got both Faceless Shamblers in hand, because they are very, very valuable cards in this matchup if you were able to get down an early body or something that you could hit with that Divine Spirit, like one Ancient Watcher, one Humongous Razor Leaf, like any big body that you could have hit with it, and they're very, very valuable and basically show-stopping against Aggro Druid.
Yeah.
But they're not seeing targets for them, and if they're forced into a position where they have to maybe like tempo one out onto a small minion just to have a body, that's basically them conceding that they don't have the ability to contest the board going into the late game.
Yeah, I mean, looking at next turn, they may have to just play Lyra to absorb some damage in order to try and find a big minion. But should they draw a big minion in the next couple turns, it's likely that Argentina would never trade into an unsilenced Humongous Razor Leaf or Ancient Watcher, so they're almost guaranteed to have the target follow-up the following turn for Faceless Shambler.
And Talon Priest, though, not what they were looking for here. This is tough because I think they still, again, they have to play it. They probably even have to Purify it just to cycle. It's, okay, they're going to tempo out Lyra and just ask the question, are you prepared to trade here or not?
Yeah, and that's a big trade to ask. But they do have Druid of the Claw, so they can just Druid of the Claw, charge in, trade in the 1/2, have a 1 health 4-attack minion, which is actually surprising, or 4-attack, surprisingly tough to get through for the Priest, and the Vicious Fledgling still charging through, so seems good to me.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I think Druid of the Claw, just one of those cards that is often neglected in Druid. It's one of the first things that gets cut when people go looking for other tech cards or they go looking for more late game. In all of the Jade Druid lists, that card has become Primordial Drake, and you just never have that option for the 4/4 charge that actually ends up being very, very powerful in situations exactly like this.
Ancient of War isn't even run anymore. That sucker's big.
I still like that as a one-of tech card to try and bait out early removal, or as a way to just uproot and get massive value off of Earthen Scales when you don't have all the Jade ramped out yet.
Yeah.
But you called exactly what was going to happen here. The charging Druid of the Claw takes care of Lyra. Vicious Fledgling gets that single attack into face, and it's going to be +3 health. So this is, if you're correct and Shadow Word Pain has been cut, this is a real problem now for South Korea, because it's going to just get progressively harder for them to answer that.
Oh, yeah. Progressively harder, basically impossible for them to answer at a certain point. And the more that attacks face, the harder it's going to get. And right now, they're forced to go with the Cabal Talon Priest plus Divine Spirit, and this is definitely telegraphing a Faceless Shambler. I wonder if that will change Argentina's game plan at all. But to be honest, it's hard to change your game plan as an aggro druid. Your strategy is not subtle.
No, and they really here, I mean, they can put down both Tar Creepers, or they can put down a Tar Creeper and Patches and hit all 4 minions with Power of the Wild.
Oh, I actually like the trades here. You do go Druid of the Claw, Vicious Fledgling into the 3/8.
Do they need to trade with the Vicious Fledgling?
No,
they do, yeah. Interesting.
They would have to, but you know, one of the things that is sometimes hard to stop yourself from doing is not hitting face with the Vicious Fledgling. If you can trade and still leave it in the same position that it was and help yourself play around Faceless Shambler more, then sometimes that can be good. They wouldn't have been sacrificing too much there, but I guess they are just saying, well, I hope you don't have it. I mean, they've seen dead cards in the hand, but oftentimes Silence Priest has a ton of dead cards because their deck relies a lot on synergy. And they are going to push face here.
Honestly, I think it makes sense, because you know for a fact at this point that even if there's a Dragonfire Potion in hand, it's not going to kill the Tar Creeper with the addition of that buff, which means that you're never actually going to get the Vicious Fledgling off the board.
Yeah. And it'll still be pretty easy for them to get through this Faceless Shambler. They will have to trade the next turn, of course, but I mean, they're not in a terrible position, to be honest. So well, we can take a look at the damage. They need 8 to get through that.
If the Vicious Fledgling hits Wind Fury, that's still game. That's how close this is right now.
I don't think quite yet, because the Tar Creeper going down to 2 attack, and they still have to get through the 8 health of the Faceless Shambler.
You're right. You're right.
I don't think they wouldn't quite have it. They could get...
They'd have to hit an additional minion or an additional buff.
Yeah. Or Savage Roar would be...
I mean, Savage Roar is game-ending here, absolutely.
Yeah, and all they can do here is just hope that they can get through. Clever use of Purify here. It's just going to bring it back up to a 3/4. It can't be healed higher.
Inner Fire, I mean, good, but not great here. I guess they play it, and they're just hoping that maybe Argentina chooses not to trade.
That's a big hope.
It's a huge hope. I don't know that it's an accurate hope. It does mean that everything that hits the board is threatened by it. It does mean that everything that trades in dies. So if they choose to trade 2 minions and take 8 damage to the face, or trade 3 minions, that does actually give Korea a little bit of time here, potentially.
Yeah. But this will almost certainly lock up the game with Bittertide Hydra coming down and a potential of 10 damage going to face. Should we pick up Wind Fury? And this is definitely not a trade.
No, I mean, there's absolutely no reason to at this point. The Death Rattle here is really nice. Just leaves extra bodies on the board in the event that they do draw into Savage Roar. Bittertide Hydra, just very, very powerful, very difficult for anyone to answer. But the Priest, if they had Shadow Word Death here, still wouldn't quite be enough.
Rough.
Yeah, it's just a sequence of really, really, really weak draws for Korea, combined with the fact that Argentina was able to coin out a Vicious Fledgling and then immediately turn around and play an additional Vicious Fledgling. So this game is largely stitched up, and it looks like Argentina going to take a convincing win with their Druid deck.
Yeah, I mean, one of the weaknesses of Silence Priest, it's being cut from a lot of competitive lists. I know at the beginning of the spring playoffs, a lot of players are bringing Silence Priest, but as we went along, you know, America's in the second week of playoffs, a lot less Silence Priest, Asia Pacific, even less Silence Priest, and now we're barely seeing Silence Priest outside of global games. It's used as, you know, just sort of, you got to bring 9 classes.
Right.
Silence Priest can get quick wins against a lot of classes, but when it's going up against an aggro deck and it doesn't have near perfect draws, it's going to die.
Right, and there's a lot of decks that struggle to remove those big Silence Priest minions if you can actually get the board state set up to allow that to occur. But there's not a lot of decks that's actually viable against. Most classes either put enough pressure on you in the early game or have enough removal that you're not going to get that massive wall of taunts established.
Yeah.
And that's the risk that you take playing that Priest list.
Yeah, but taking a look at the scores for the series, it's now tied up with that Druid win from Ildimit. But Snail versus Kranich is up next. It's going to be Paladin versus Paladin. Now, both these players have seen success in the Hearthstone Championship Tour, but Kranich, one of the few players in the world, 2, that have made it to 2 World Championships at BlizzCon. Him and Tice, I believe, are the only 2 players. So an impressive feat for him, and now he'll be competing at another seasonal championship, which means he's got a chance, if he makes it in the top 4 of that, to go to a 3rd BlizzCon, the first player to do so, or the 3rd World Championship, sorry, which is going to be, if he does do it, the single best accomplishment in Hearthstone to date.
Yeah, it would be incredibly impressive. I'm really excited to see exactly what these guys have brought for Paladin lists. Paladin is a class where I think we can all generally agree that the control styles and the mid-range styles have sort of become the de facto standard. There's not a lot of aggro Paladin out there. So the question becomes, have they gone for the mid-range tech package that runs primarily Murloc? Have they gone for the mid-range tech package that runs a lot of the 1/1 tokens and tries to set that up? Or are they going for a purely control style that runs all of the Paladin's very powerful board wipes?
There's actually quite a huge range of Murloc Paladin. You can build it more aggressive, where you put in a lot more Murlocs and like Divine Favors, and you know you top out a Tyrion instead of having Light Lord or Primordial Drake. But a lot of times the mid range is sort of what you expect. It's the most popular, just like standard mid range, maybe slightly aggressive Murloc Paladin. But with 2 Paladin decks, we're likely to see a little bit of differences. We've surprisingly seen a lot of control Paladin in Hearthstone Global games. I think even this week we've seen a couple. So could be anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at how the matchups played out between these 2 countries, if you saw that your opponent had access to Paladin, I don't think you necessarily go for the coin flip on, we just think we're going to try and get lucky and we'll hit War Leader before they do, right? I think if you're going into that matchup in a heads-up way, you're saying we have a control list that's going to allow us to wipe the board, and as soon as you shut down Murloc Paladin effectively one time, kill off, the War Leaders or maybe the Megasaurs, and there's no really great refill, no really great ability to reestablish a board, that's a lost game. To say nothing of the healing potential that exists between Light Lord and Lay on Hands and Forbidden Healing, and that's a really, really strong strategy if one of these 2 countries has brought a list like that. So I'm anticipating that at least one, if not both of these lists, airs more on the side of control.
And you getting a glimpse of the players here as we're about to jump into the matchup. Looks to be pretty early over there in South Korea. Kranich looking a little bit tired, and you can see the bright sunlight coming through his apartment window, which is the bane of most gamers' existence. But it looks like a little bit more of aggressive Murloc Paladin versus, I don't know.
I mean, so Argentina...
That's an Elise.
Yeah. Seeing Grimscale, Chum, and Murloc Tidecaller, you have to think this is a deck that's designed to get aggressive early on. This is honestly a situation where they can just throw away Spike Ridge Steed and keep the rest of that as a really, really powerful early-game mulligan. South Korea's list, with everything we saw in both the initial mulligan and since, definitely telegraphs a control deck.
Oh, yeah. Elise is an interesting tech inclusion. I remember there was a player in the Americas playoffs, Watt, W-O-T, from Colombia, who played a mid-range Murloc Paladin with Elise.
Interesting.
It was very bizarre.
I definitely missed that one.
He started off 3-0 in the Swiss rounds, but then quickly lost out his next 3 in order to be eliminated from the Swiss contention. But it stuck out of my mind because it was such a cool tech inclusion that didn't make any sense. But it was interesting, and it was him trying to innovate to play those long matchups where you talked about if you lose the board, you have as mid-range Murloc Paladin, you don't have much reload. And he used the Elise as sort of a way to, hey, when they've removed my board a couple times, I got no more Murlocs. Let me just slam open this Ungoro pack and try and reload the board. It was very creative, but in Control Paladin, it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things where Paladin as a whole doesn't run a ton of draw because the draw in Paladin is so limited, right? Unless you're playing Lay on Hands, which you're playing as much for the healing as the draw, a lot of other Paladin draw options have cycled out of Standard, and they're left basically with, can we hit a big Divine Favor, or does small-time recruits work? It might work in Argentina's deck. It certainly doesn't in South Korea's. So you have to just take into consideration, what are you going to try to do? How are you going to attempt to keep yourself in the game? There's versions of this where you could have run like a Cult Master or something and tried to get value out of that. It looks to me, though, like Argentina has kind of a weird deck that has a whole bunch of alternate options, because we're seeing here a Vine Cleaver, which is definitely not standard in the aggressive Murloc Paladin.
Yeah, I've seen this list a couple times in my ladder pass this season. Most notably, just like 2 days ago, I was playing. I played against Osaka on the America servers. He was like ranked 50 legend, I think. He was playing what seems to be this exact same list. He had Vine Cleaver and he had Wicker Flame, and he had an aggressive Murloc package early on. So I have seen this list before. It's not something new that Argentina has done, but it is less popular than just say, you know, the standard non-Wicker Flame per Bristle Vine Cleaver mid-range combo. That's one of the things about this deck, is it's very, unlike Token Shaman, which we mentioned before, where almost all the lists are 30 for 30 the exact same cards. It's hard to find a mid-range Paladin or a low-curve Murloc Paladin that's the same. There's oftentimes some tech inclusion that separates it from itself. I've actually seen Onyxia as well become a little bit more popular as a tech inclusion for that instead of Primordial Drake.
Just to be able to go wide on the board.
You get it with Curator because it's a dragon, and it also has immense synergy with the Sunkeeper Tarim. And it also almost guarantees that you're sticking a minion on the board for the following turn. I really like that tech inclusion. We actually saw it in global games in the final week of Stage 2, I believe. I can't remember the country that played it, but that sort of dragon tech for Curator sort of stuck out on my mind.
I like the choice here. I mean, as tempting as it is to take a second Tyrion, I like the choice to get the Crazed Worshipper and have something that you can do in the mid-game here. You don't know at this point enough about your opponent's deck to know authoritatively what to expect. There is the possibility that in an aggro deck, a single Spellbreaker is not an unheard of tech card, which shuts down the usage of a Spike Ridge Seed really effectively. So having something for a mid-game body for South Korea, I think, is really important right now.
Yeah, definitely. And you talked about sort of card draw and Paladin earlier. You don't really need card draw when you have double Stonehill Defender picking up a bunch of taunts. Also, Hydrologist can sometimes be a card that generates you resources, because if you get Redemption or Getaway Kodo, a lot of times that's effectively like drawing a card, because you can sort of manipulate how you play those secrets and isolate a target on the board with Redemption up, or try and mind games your opponent into Getaway Kodoing something really impactful. So it is a deck that can run out of resources fairly quickly, but a lot of times if you put in a ton of card draw in the deck, and you end up having too many options and too many resources, which can happen, especially in a deck like Murloc Paladin, which by nature has that swarmy, aggressive style.
Yeah, this is going to be fun to watch, because there's definitely just cards happening on both sides here that are non-standard for this list, this matchup. Like you said, I mean, obviously, some experimentation has occurred. People have played these lists, but both these players are expecting, when they queue up in a Paladin mirror, to see a pretty core, typical mid-range Murloc Paladin or Control Paladin, and then they're seeing kind of these one-of awkward tech choices coming out. It's interesting to me, too, that, I mean, I think you're right that card draw isn't significant per se in this deck, but particularly so when you're dealing with the mirror match, because neither of these decks is going to go really fast or really wide on the board. So your removal package, you've got lots of time to kind of fish up, set yourself up for really good trades. If this were a really aggressive deck coming out from Argentina, South Korea could actually be in a lot of trouble and really trying very aggressively to get something in the way of the wide board, or desperately hoping to survive until they can play a Spike Ridge Steed and then gambling on there being no silence effects.
Yeah.
So right now, both these guys just have some amount of time to kind of, dabble and see what combinations they can fish up in their own decks and what their opponents are doing.
This list is very greedy from South Korea. We saw the Karen, which almost certainly indicated N'Zoth. And Karen and N'Zoth are pretty much the only two cards that you have to put into a control paladin deck to make it a N'Zoth paladin. There's really no other great death rattles. I mean, you always have Tyrion.
Yeah, Tyrion is included by default.
Yeah,
would have made that second Tyrion in lieu of the Crazed Worshipper maybe really interesting. But again, I think you're right. Just this is already such a greedy list, right? If you're running N'Zoth and Cairn and all you have in hand is spells, you can't afford to take Tyrion and just have nothing to put on the board until turn 8.
Yeah, very true. And we can't forget about the third Tyrion, or the fourth Tyrion, or even the fifth Tyrion.
That's a lot of Tyrions.
When the fifth Tyrion comes down, that's when you just sort of throw in the towel.
That's makes me wish that there was some way that Paladin could get a copy of the Rogue Quest and complete it by playing just Tyrions.
By playing Tyrions.
Nerf it to a 5/5 instead of a 6/6, but
I think it is possible to get the Rogue Quest. I'm just trying to think how.
Okay, well when you think of it, you let me know, because I'm gonna take that on ladder.
Talk to the lovely people for a second while I am deep in thought.
All right, while TJ's deep in thought, this is definitely I think a situation where South Korea has a really good mid-game board here. Argentina has to just decide how they're going to try to contest it. Playing this Consecration is a way for them to kind of clear the majority of the board. Wicker Flame obviously really powerful, but they kind of want to hold on to him on the off chance they can hit him with the Spike Ridge Steed, or otherwise just use him as a way to stabilize, which they don't need right now. And Consecration, it's a resource that they have to value when they're thinking about ways to wipe the board later on, but right now, fundamentally, they're not behind, and they can really afford to utilize it as a resource to contest the board. They're going to have qualities later on that's not an important resource to them at this exact stage of the game.
I couldn't think of anything. I know there's a way. It's just harder in Standard. It's easy in Wild, but harder in Standard. Come back to me later. My subconscious is working on it.
All right. Well, while your subconscious is working on it, what do you think Korea is going to choose to do here? Do they gamble on getting a Spike Ridge Steed out there and contesting the board? Is it better for them to True Silver and clear the Megasaur? Does Karen just come down?
Well, it looks like Karen has to come down now because they gave up their only minion for Spike Ridge Steed. I like getting the Karen out just because you're almost guaranteed to have a minion survive the next turn for Spike Ridge Steed anyway. And Karen is oftentimes a hard minion to play later on in the game because it doesn't impact the board immediately, and it's also pretty expensive for a 4/5 body. So with that, you say, well, I'm next turn I'm very likely to have a minion on board for Spike Ridge Steed, and any turn after turn 8, I can guarantee it with a hero power. So Karen, I think, is a good development here, but they basically trade over their 3/1 for nothing as the Gentle Megasaur comes back as a 5/1.
And it was a 5/1 before as well.
It was a 5/1 before.
This is going to get interesting. I think that if you are Argentina in this position, you know exactly what you're up against now. Karen, like you said, once it's included in Paladin, telegraphs exactly what's going on. They know Tyrion's coming later, which by virtue of those two cards alone, absolutely telegraphs the N'Zoth. They probably don't know enough about the hand state to know that N'Zoth has come up at this point, but they're definitely just now thinking like, okay, how do we apply pressure? Because we can't afford, we're not going to win this game on value. We can't outvalue N'Zoth. That's a tough ask. It's a very difficult question. I like the Spike Ridge Steed here as a way to just sort of stop the bleeding and put some pressure on, but it's going to be very difficult here. And it does ask, I guess, whether or not Korea has removal in hand.
Korea could counter with their own Spike Ridge Steed. It's not going to be able to run over the Hydrologists, but that sucker's going to be a 6/11.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, Equality is a premium resource in this matchup, and they're not really, I think, afraid of anything if there was a really great silence effect in hand and you were Argentina on the previous turn and you could silence Karen and clear it very, very efficiently, which basically disables a huge portion of the N'Zoth value, you would have done that. You would have gone for that and just put a lot of pressure on, because that's a great place to be in, especially with, you know, Curator to reload in hand, Vine Cleaver to start dealing some damage and getting more minions on the board. I can't imagine that South Korea is afraid of this Karen going anywhere anytime soon.
No. And silence effects are pretty rare in Paladin, so...
It would have to have been a very, very, like, distinct and deliberate tech choice to do that.
Yes. Yeah. It would be a tech choice that says, I don't like Spiker Steed.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you tech it, right? The single Spellbreaker in any deck right now is basically, do I anticipate hitting Paladin? And if so, I want this as a one of. Yeah. So do you like War Leader and Megasaur here? Do you Curator?
War Leader and Megasaur gives you basically you have enough damage to get through the Spiker Steeded Karen as it is, but you have the opportunity to get Divine Shield on the Hydrologist, which would preserve a lot of power. You get the Adapt on the Morlock War Leader as well, which is really valuable, because if you can protect that with either health or Divine Shield for itself, then that gives you a lot of room for Murlocs. Curator also is just great, because then if they have Primordial Drake, which is likely, then they're going to be able to pick that up, which is fantastic. And Curator, again, is another minion that's kind of hard to use, because for its cost, it's not that great of a body.
I was not expecting to see Deathwing come off the top there.
Well, Deathwing, I've actually seen Deathwing. Primordial Drake has been, by and large, sometimes a liability for Murloc Paladins, because they don't want to sweep up their own board. Yeah, it's a defensive tool, but this deck doesn't really want to be defensive. And Nixia was a card that I said was making its way into some, but Deathwing has made its way into a lot. There was another country that played it earlier this week in the matches yesterday. It might have been Canada, actually, that played it in their list. I can't quite remember, but we've seen it twice in global games this week, and on ladder, whenever I see Deathwing and Paladin, I cry a little bit inside, because I never expect it, even though I do expect it, and then it makes me sad.
Well, we wouldn't want you to be sad, DJ. It's the last thing we want.
I don't like being sad.
I do know that Deathwing is a tech that has made its way back into Control as a whole. There's definitely some number of Control Warrior lists floating around that ran it. A couple of other things that have tried to make it work.
Big Druid.
Big Druid loves it, but this is now a very difficult position, I think, for Argentina, because they're not getting the cards in sequence that they want here. They've got no Murlocs on board to hit with these War Leaders, so they've just kind of showed up too little too late. They can Vine Cleaver and get rid of the Stegodon, but there's still a 6/7 Karen staring them down. This is okay. This is all right. So they're going to get rid of the Stegodon using their board presence and just try to play the slow game. I don't know if you're Argentina if you win the slow game though.
It's tough. Ooh, Rhinoros Lightlord picked up. All right, so let's take a look at the math this turn. They can. I don't think you want to Sunkeeper Terran, because that Karen is still going to take a lot of resources from your opponent to get through. And that just leaves Rhinoros Lightlord as the only other option. Cool. That was easy.
Asked and answered. I mean, Lightlord healing face, great. Lightlord healing Karen and keeping that enormous, enormous body alive, also great.
Probably better.
In some ways better, yeah. He's going to go to the Karen, so that's
lovely.
6/11 Karen just hanging out, and I mean, what do you do?
Snail just looks defeated right now.
Yeah, I mean, even if they had the ability to play Deathwing here, which they don't, it would just be very difficult for them to actually get back into an advantageous position. They can dump a lot of resources on the board and set themselves up to play Deathwing on a subsequent turn, right? Throw Wicker Flame out, throw both the War Leaders out, just go wide on the board and hope, right? Because at this point, you're reasonably confident that South Korea is not going to, Pyromancer equality and ruin their own board. So in some ways, you want to just ask them to do a bunch of trading. The flip side, unfortunately, is that they're actually going to be under a lot of pressure. They're going to start and take massive face damage every turn. And if by some chance they're reading that South Korea has held on to Equality Consecration, right, that's what is in hand right now, then they're in a lot of trouble because they actually can't afford to go wide on the board. So there's some amount of risk here no matter what they do.
Yeah, this is pretty much the strongest play they can make on the board. A lot of times you don't want to preemptively gentle Megasaur because of the fact that you don't really know what you want yet. Also, next turn they can couple Murloc War Leader with Megasaur to not only buff their Murlocs with the War Leader, but also adapt them with the Megasaur, so it makes more sense. And again, you want to sort of, block some of these attacks with the Wicker Frame. If that thing absorbs 14 damage, an attack from Light Lord and an attack from Karen, you're pretty happy. But Kevin, I want to tell you a little story.
I love it when you tell me stories, DJ.
I talked about Snail earlier and how he looked defeated. So I go for walks at night with my wife, usually like right when it gets dark. And around where I live, there's a ton of snails that come out at night and try and make the trek across the sidewalk. Okay? And they do it at dusk because, it's probably the safest to do because there's no predators and there's less people. So it's usually like the safest time for them to do it. But man, those things move slow and that sidewalk is wide and it takes a long time for them to get over there. And I always feel so bad when I walk because it's dark outside and I've stepped on probably 100 snails in the past couple months walking across because they're just going so slow and I can't see them. Snail looked as defeated as those snails look when they see me coming, when they think it's safe to cross the sidewalk at night.
I was definitely about to ask if Snail looked as though you had stepped on him. I thought that was sort of the punchline to that story. But
no, I'd like to think that those snails, when they see me coming, they're worried because they see me, but I definitely don't see them.
Yeah, well, I think that's sort of how Argentina feels right now. They saw this coming, and they're just trying to figure out what they can do to stay afloat here.
Yeah.
There's probably a world in which War Leader Megasaur kind of buys them back into the game a little bit because N'Zoth got used just to put Karen back out. They've got the Spike Ridge Steed on Bane, so there is a Stegodon left behind that. Light Lord probably survives this turn unless they are able to hit Poisonous. Fundamentally, I mean, I think if you're Argentina, you're all in on something here. And what that something is kind of up to you, but it feels like their best out right now is to play as much of the hand as possible and hold on to Deathwing as a follow-up turn where they can say, okay, look, if you've still got, unfortunately, Equality or Sunkeeper, one of the easy ways, or an Elder Peacekeeper, right? Some way to make Deathwing less significant, bring it. But we need to see Argentina here just throw everything they've got on the board and attempt like crazy to get some value here.
Yeah. Deathwing is their hope of getting across the sidewalk, and Sunkeeper Tarim is me.
That's that analogy went a place I wasn't expecting, but I love it. So they're not going to be able, unfortunately, here to get value out of the Vine Cleaver. That's interesting.
I would think even like an attacked face would have been
just to get the damage in, just to get the extra bodies on the board. Yeah, I
but
mean,
it doesn't really matter. I mean, at this point, South Korea is almost home free.
Yeah, I mean, they're only showing, what is that? That's a total of 1721 damage now with the weapon. There's probably a good argument to be made for killing off the War Leaders using the True Silver Champion and Cairn. But I mean, fundamentally, this is, unless something really crazy happens with Argentina's refill after the Deathwing, this is basically a one game for South Korea.
I would say so.
Very tough position to be in because Argentina did start with a really good explosive start. It was just that Doomsayer tech has so much value when Korea can just plop it down on turn 2 and kind of watch and wait. Light Lord here gonna go face, which is really, really, really good for South Korea right now. I feel like Argentina is probably gonna have to use the Vine Cleaver to clear the Cairn and then Deathwing. And as soon as they see, the Pyromancer Equality or the Sunkeeper, they're able to just say, all right, we tried. That new Deathwing animation, though, so good.
It is pretty cool. It is quite cool. So, which way to remove the Deathwing would we like to go with?
Interesting question. These are not great options, actually.
I mean, Rathion draws a card.
Yeah, but
and if it hits a dragon like Primordial Drake,
the hits keep on coming. Yeah. So I mean, this Sunkeeper coming down. I mean, Snail looks as defeated as he did before, possibly slightly more defeated, like 14% more defeated than he was earlier.
Yeah, I mean, what can they even pick up that's good for them now? They discarded their Tyrion because they had to play the Deathwing that turn. They couldn't risk dying from the Tyrion getting removed efficiently. So,
I mean, they're not dead on board, but they certainly don't have a lot of really great hopes left. I mean, we've seen both their Spike Ridge Steeds, both their Gentle Megasaurs, both their War Leaders. Like the Murloc package is effectively exhausted, except for some of the early game ones.
Yeah.
And a second Hydrologist is not going to be game winning. Discarding Tyrion hurt them a lot. I think. Oh goodness, I think this is over.
just about.
There's not lethal available, but just Argentina just can't reload. If they had a War Leader or a Megasaur left to hit, like there might be a world in which they could come back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there is without that.
Yeah, they do want to make sure that they remove these 1/1s, whether it's Wild Pyromancer plus a Forbidden Healing or just a Consecration, because Sunkeeper Terram could be the way that Argentina is able to put some more pressure on the board. So one of these is coming down this turn, and the Consecration looks like it makes more sense, because then if Sunkeeper Terram comes down, they're more likely to be able to get through it. I think with it'd be tough still, because it'd be a 3/7 taunt, but still it's looking like this is going to be a game over. Argentina taxing the Rathion, honorable Sudoku, and that's South Korea taking a 2-1 lead.
Yeah, I gotta hand it to Korea. When we talked about Paladin Mirror earlier and we were looking at kind of what might work, my strong hope was that one of these teams was coming in with a solid control Paladin list. I wasn't expecting the Zoth specifically, but I think that's a really, really smart read from Korea to say we're gonna bring a really, really, really greedy Paladin list and hope to hit a non-Jade Druid control matchup.
Yeah, and it definitely worked out, and it was a greedy list. They even had the Elise tucked in there that we never saw drawn.
The Elise never showed up.
It was in the mulligans. We saw it. We knew it was there, and one of my favorite cards. But let's go now and take a look at the score. South Korea now with a 2-1 lead, and we may not even need the ace match, because next up it's going to be Handsome Guy with his Druid versus Now Udon with the Priest deck. Same match we saw before, just flipped teams.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens here. I feel like there must be some expectation on Argentina's part that this is not an aggro druid, because if it's an aggro druid and you have the token shaman list queued up and ready to go, I feel like you would take that into that matchup way before you would take priest.
But
so
on the other hand, if the mage deck is any type of control mage, that deck usually has a really good matchup against the shaman because of the how many board sweeps it actually has. Volcanic Potion, just a single Volcanic Potion can win you the game sometimes. And then, of course, you Doppelgangster Evolve, they just meteor way down 2. It's really tough. And then you want to win the game with Bloodlust, but then they have Ice Block up, and then they can remove your board, develop another Ice Block. It's really tough matchup. So maybe they don't care if it's aggro druid. Maybe they just want to dodge the mage at all costs. But there's the players getting ready.
I love that the Handsome Guy has his Hearthstone trophy front and center behind him. That's great.
I'm doing that every time, right above my head. Make sure that it's always in frame.
Yeah, it's like he looks at his own camera and he's like, all right, I gotta shift over just a little bit. People can't quite see the entirety of my trophy.
Yeah, now we don't know. He's a player that all of the, or I think most of the Latin American players play on the Americas servers.
Right.
So, I end up playing against him a lot. We end up seeing them in the Americas playoffs, so they're sort of jumbled in there. And he's a player that's been around for so long. He's been competing in the preliminaries and the playoffs for the past couple years. He's been participating in Copa America, having success there. He's definitely a storied player within that region. It's just the region oftentimes is overlooked when it comes to big competitive Hearthstone because they don't have those big finishes at international events.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we talked about this actually. I remember talking about this on broadcast when we were watching Brazil play, and there's definitely just some amount of regional pride that these guys have as well, where all of the sort of South American, Latin American countries, they all just kind of root for each other, right? Like even if Argentina doesn't actually make it out of this group, all the Argentinian fans are just going to turn around and say, you know what, let's get on board with Mexico or with Brazil. And okay, this is going to be interesting because this is definitely a very, very late game Jade Druid. What do you suppose we're looking at for Priest? I don't think any of these cards really tell us.
Well, Shadow or Death tells us something. Shadow or Death tells us that it's not Silence Priest, and Shadow or Death also tells us that it's not the new type of Miracle Priest that we've seen cropped up with Injured Blade Master, Circle of Healing, Light Warden, Divine Spirit, Inner Fire. So it's somewhere in the middle. It could be Dragon Priest, we just don't see dragons, and it could be like just a Control Priest with... we've seen Control Priest range anywhere from topping out at Lyra and just being like Acolyte of Pains, Northshire Clerics, draw a bunch earlier, Divine Spirit, Inner Fire, kill your opponent, all the way up to Medivh, Free from Amber. So, I mean, those cards tell us some things, but not a lot. We're going to need to see if there's a dragon. That doesn't tell us anything still.
Yeah, I mean, so this is interesting. I'm wondering if Argentina queued this up expecting to hit Aggro Druid, and they're now going to have to reevaluate their game plan very, very quickly.
Yeah, now I think Priest does, whether it's Dragon Priest or the Control/Miracle Priest, does have a lot of game against Jade Druid. Because one of the consistencies across both those is that they both can build big threats pretty early on. Draconid Operative is very hard to deal with because it's a minion that not only generates resources but also is a very threatening body. And the Miracle Priest/Control Priest, you get a big minion early on, a Divine Spirit, Inner Fired, anything. One of the weaknesses of Jade Druid is that they lack hard removal.
I mean, one of the weaknesses of Druid as a whole is that it's just a removal light class.
Yeah.
There's very little in the way of single target removal outside of low damage spells, unless you're willing to run Naturalize, which has a fairly substantial risk built into it.
Yeah.
And they also don't have really good wide board removal. If you're not running Spell Power for your swipe, or I guess Starfall, it's just very difficult to clear a board of multiple minions as well.
Yeah.
So this is, it could go either way. It's really going to come down to who gets the bigger body on the board first.
Yeah, F in the chat for Mulch, am I right?
Yeah, that's that was my favorite tech card in Druids in tournaments, was that one of Mulch.
It was the bane of flame-wreathed facelesses everywhere. All right, Crystalline Oracle. Still doesn't really tell us much. Crystalline Oracle is pretty much a tech card. I've seen it in Dragon Priest, but most notably, I see it in the late game Control Priests. So the Control Priests that do run like Medivh and Free from Amber. Basically the Kibler-esque priests.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That would be Brian's signature style. So what if you're Argentina and you have this on the board, what are you hoping to hit with it?
With Crystalline Oracle?
Yeah.
I mean, anything of use. You don't want to hit Jades, of course.
I mean, actually, potentially hitting Jade Idol would be a really interesting thing to have available to you to prevent losing in fatigue.
Yeah, but this matchup almost never goes to fatigue because,
and if it goes that long, Druid wins anyway.
Yeah, before you get to unless the Druid has to use their second Jade Idol to contest the board. But even then, like, you have so much Jade generation in the deck that you're at like 10/10s without even having to use the second Jade Idol with Aya, Behemoths, Jade Spirits, Jade Blossom. So,
right, and
Aya is actually probably the best.
Aya's pretty good, yeah. It's also interesting that you point out too things like Jade Spirit. So we were talking earlier about how Jade Druid has kind of started in a lot of situations to drift to that anti-aggro package that runs Pyromancers, Acolytes of Pain, tries to get additional draw engine stuff happening there, and it cuts a lot of the top end to do that. It also has to get rid of Jade Spirits, because Jade Spirits are one of the cards that you just can't afford to be doing that and also have all that early game, because you're going to lose one too many of the key things, whether it's your Nourishes or your Auctioneers. You can cut one Auctioneer and still plausibly play the deck, but you definitely don't, as a general rule, run both Jade Spirit and the early game anti-aggro package.
Yeah.
So this is definitely a later game. I mean, Feral Rage is also just telegraphed to us that this is a Jade Druid that's set up to win control matchups.
A lot of things not happening, but also some things happening. Argentina held on to this Northshire Cleric, knowing that it's the second one. It's really the only draw engine that priests have, so they want to make sure that as soon as they play that, they're getting immediate value out of it instead of throwing it away and maybe having it eat a Feral Rage or a second Wrath. So I really like that hold on. And South Korea not hitting ramp.
Yeah, I do like that you definitely covered all the options. There's
Yes.
some things that didn't happen and some things that did. That's a pretty exhaustive read.
Ah.
There we go. All right. So does South Korea just wild growth and walk away here, or do they want to get on the board with this Jade Spirit?
To be honest, I think Innervate Gadgetzan Go is a reasonable play.
Yeah, I mean, Gadgetzan is very difficult to remove for the Priest.
It is almost impossible to remove for the Priest outside of Pint-Sized Potion, Shadow Word Horror.
Right, or the Dragonfire Potion when we get to that point of the game.
But you stick it on the turn. Next turn, they go into turn 5, unless they hit Innervate from that Crystalline Oracle, which you know they can't because you have both of them.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a lot of work here.
Wait, does it work that way? I think it's in the deck to start, Crystalline Oracle is. I don't think it's in the deck... period. I don't know.
I'm not sure off the top of my head.
I'll get back to you on that one. I haven't played with Crystalline Oracle enough. I'll get back to you on that one. My subconscious is working on it. And by my subconscious, I mean Google.
Well, so this is, I mean, in a way, it would have been interesting if South Korea had just decided to pop off there and, innervate out the Auctioneer, innervate out the Wild Growth, like just throw a whole bunch of things and see what sticks. They kind of still have that option with Auctioneer to double innervate next turn. So Argentina really here has to just ask the question. They have to put something on the board that says, okay, are you prepared to sit and do your own Jade things and let us leave Lyra on the board? Is that a risk you're willing to take? And unfortunately, Lyra normally very difficult to remove for Druid, but Pharaoh Rage and Hero Power is exactly the set of tools to do it.
Yeah, and South Korea says, we have double innervate Auctioneer. The longer we wait, the more likely we are to hit more cheap spells to be able to use. So they're okay removing this pretty valuable resource and effectively passing their turn to do so, just because of the fact that they know that when they do go off, man, as the kids call it these days, they're popping off.
Oh, these kids. So I mean, the Aya comes out. That's a good threat. But I mean, if you're South Korea here, like you just have so many options. And I mean, you can choose to go for it here with the Auctioneer. You could also just play the Jade Blossom and hang on to things, because if you're able to get the
Jade Spirit Jade Blossom.
Jade Spirit Jade Blossom is perfect. This is exactly what you need. Just go wide on the board, force the Priest player to start taking some trades, and you've still got Auctioneer and Fandral. So regardless of what you need to do on a subsequent turn, like Fandral Feral Rage is a huge turn. Auctioneer Innervate is a huge turn. There's so many possible outs here for Druid. Really, the biggest threat to them right now is, does the Priest get to do any of their really, really awesome spell shenanigans? And you've already seen Lyra. So the miracle potential is already gone.
Yeah. There is some pretty powerful turns Argentina can make here. They can go with the Potion of Madness on the 2-2, hit it into the 2-3, trade in their 1-1 Jade, trade over the 1-1 with their Aya, Northshire Cleric heal it to draw a card and build up a very menacing board. Holy Nova in the deck. That's pretty interesting.
I mean, it's not a huge shock, I guess, although it does make me wonder exactly how much removal they're running altogether, because we've seen...
ton.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Dragonfire Potion in hand, Potion of Madness, we've seen a Death, we're seeing a Pain. Holy Nova is excessive. They're gonna go for the play you've described here, which I think is certainly relatively correct. Trading with Aya feels bad, I guess, but
You're getting a card.
The draw is so important right now.
You're not going to really beat the Jade Druid by beating them down early, because they have so many tools to survive. You're going to beat them by slowly building up a board that they can never deal with, and then killing them before their Jades get out of control. You don't need to kill them right away. You just need to kill them before all of a sudden that Jade Behemoth spawns an 8/8 alongside it. So, ooh.
That's a tough call. You've got Fandral Nourish available for a subsequent turn. I think Jade Blossom here is very, very valuable.
Yeah.
You could Fandral Feral Rage, technically, which, I mean, is expensive, but would allow you to deal with probably, honestly, the Radiant Elemental, because you're not really as worried about Aya on board and the trade as you are about the potential for a whole string of spell shenanigans.
Yeah.
They're going to go for it here with multiple spells. Wrath off the top is huge.
Yeah. But again, you want to kill all three of these minions. You can, because you also could protect your Gadgetzan Auctioneer by trading into the Aya and then like wrathing down the 2-3, because then they have to have an additional damage in order to get through. So I actually like this because it is the most likely that their Gadget Auctioneer survives. And if Argentina is forced to use a removal, which South Korea probably thinks is Dragonfire Potion only, that's a pretty big deal. Holy Nova will help, but it's still, that's 5 mana. And your 2/2 that you're trading over to deal with the minion that's already drawn South Korea, what, 5 cards?
Well,
so,
and
3 cards, sorry.
We're fast
4
approaching
cards.
the point where Dragonfire Potion isn't an answer either. If you look at the state of the Jade situation here, Aya and Jade Blossom, that alone gets you to a point where the next Jade card you play is now no longer threatened by Dragonfire Potion.
Yeah.
And you're already out of range of Priest removal. They can death 1 big Jade, but the hits are just going to keep coming here. And, I mean, there's still the possibility of, like, the Fandral Nourish setting up a Jade Blossom. Like, you can still do a lot of work here. The Druid's going to be able to draw into some pretty good stuff. We know there's still, obviously, you know, second Behemoth buried in this deck somewhere. We haven't seen the Swipe come back since the Mulligan, so there's still Swipe out there somewhere. And we know there's a Yogg. So if everything goes awful, there's still Yogg buried at the bottom of this deck somewhere.
Yeah, this is pretty rough. This is really rough. I mean, Dragonfire Potion almost has to be used here, and then they have to trade off their whole board in order to do so. The only way that they don't have to trade off their board is if they Cabal Talon Priest one of these minions, trade over. Nope, even then.
Doesn't matter. They're either leaving the new Jade Golem up or they're losing their board.
Yeah.
One way or the other, and it's not a position you want to be in as the Priest player. Even if they do choose to Dragonfire here and they tempo out the Talon Priest, I mean, that's not really the position they were hoping to be in this late in the game. When you know that this Druid deck has a ton of draw, has a ton of big threats coming, you needed to be ahead in this game and able to take advantage of your draw engines yourself.
Yeah. This is not looking good. Most likely Fandral Nourish here. They could follow that up with a Tar Creeper.
I also really like the possibility here, even though it's not a lot of armor value, that they could Earthen Scales Fandral to protect it from being removed.
Ah, yeah. And now that they picked up Jade Idol, it looks like, and also would protect it from Dragonfire Potion as well.
Right, takes it out of range of all of the removal that could possibly exist right now.
Yeah. Now the one thing about using Jade Idol with Fandral on the board is it does dilute your deck with more Jade Idols, and that's not necessarily a good thing when you still have 10 cards remaining. Because there are some cards that they may rather draw than Jade Idol, like Jade Behemoth or Gadzen Auctioneer, and by putting Jade Idols in your deck, you make that less likely. But at this point, their Jades are big enough to where if they draw Jade Idol, they're still pretty happy because that's a 7/7. Early on the game is when it becomes a liability. When your Jades are still small, you'd rather draw something else besides it. But right now, I do agree with the play.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Jade cards left, like, there's got to be a second Behemoth, there's got to be a second, I would think a second Jade Spirit, but we're mostly down, like, they're down to a point where before the shuffle, they were down to 10 cards, and there is still some amount of cycle left, because there is another Nourish. Okay, so this is the situation you've described where the dilution is a problem.
Yeah, and now they can't even trade off their Fandral, so they're putting more Jade Idols in their deck. They do have, like you said, they have second Swipe, second Auctioneer, second Jade Spirit, second Jade Behemoth, Primordial Drake, Yogg-Saron, and at this point, 2 more Jade Idols. That makes up 9 of the cards that are left in the deck. Second Wild Growth is in there somewhere as well. Maybe a second Tar Creeper, second Nourish.
I expect there's a second Auctioneer as well.
Yeah. So that makes up the 12 cards, and you know you want to draw an Auctioneer, and they're going to actually forego the Jade Idol here just because they don't want to put more in their deck. They'd rather draw one of those cards that helps that Jade Idol become better, like an Auctioneer or a Nourish, before they play the Jade Idol and put more in their deck.
This is so scary. Like, you've got this Dragonfire Potion, you can use it and you can clear 2 minions, but it's the Jade Behemoth and Fandral. I don't think that's great. I mean, I think that this is a situation where the pain onto the Jade Behemoth is basically mandatory. The death on the 7/7 is getting close to being mandatory. Yeah, they're gonna go for it here. I'm not gonna be shocked if they choose to play the Inner Fire, because I feel like the odds that they're gonna get a better target than this are rapidly approaching 0.
Yeah.
The question is, at this point, do you remove Fandral to protect yourself from more double choose one effect shenanigans? Do you kill the 6/6 because you're afraid of the damage?
There's not really that many choose one effects left. There's Jade Idol and
Second
the
Nourish, I
second
guess.
Nourish.
Yeah.
That is it. Because we've seen both Feral Rages. We've seen one well, we've actually seen what, 2? No, we've seen 1 Jade. No, 2 Jade Idols. I don't know.
Yeah, the
There's
one
3 in the deck.
one they played and the one they drew. You've
Sure,
seen 2 of
yeah.
the 4,
5,
5.
8, 50.
Well, I mean that's where this is headed, and unfortunately now Argentina is just they're stuck, right? This 8/8 Jade Golem is enormous. There's not lethal damage on board yet, but it's very close. A Goro pack could do
Goro
something,
pack!
but
Foul Spine Slayer. Let's see it. They got another release. That's even better.
I mean, Hydrologist into Spike Ridge Seed gives them some amount of time, or they can Shell Shifter and Stegodon and just buy themselves a couple of turns here, maybe? I mean, none of this is good. None of this wins them the game. They're just stalling, and I don't, at this point, know what they can be stalling towards.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Man, think about how many cards that they can add to their collection if they just keep playing Elise over and over again.
Yeah, it's Chain Elise forever. That would be okay. So they're gonna throw down the Hydrologist. I like maybe the Getaway Kodo.
Yeah. You kind of. I mean, this play is really just gonna.
It buys you a turn, and that's all they can hope for at this point.
Yeah. Okay. So, are there any Ungoro cards that can punish you by going super wide on the board with big minions? King Mosh, if you can damage him.
Yeah, King Mosh. I mean, you could maybe get
Double Vile Spine Slayer with a.
or I mean, even like Swamp King Dread wouldn't be enough at this point.
No. Because you're not playing the Jade Idols are a spell, so
Right, they're being
it's just
summoned.
generating. They're not being played, so
Yeah.
Swamp King Dread doesn't even. Swamp King
even
Dread
help.
could kill the 3/6. I know that both Jade Behemoths have been played, so it could kill the 2/3 body of the Jade Spirit. Well,
It's not going to do it. So I mean, there's a lot of Jade Idols in this deck, so I think Korea is saying you can't answer this. We don't need to worry about the addition of more things into this deck.
There could get to a point if they think that there's nothing left in the hand for South Korea, if they Dragonfire Potion, Stegodon, buy themselves one more turn, and then go wide on the board, pick up another Elise pack, and that Ungoro pack picks up another bunch of minions that they can go wide on the board, and South Korea continues to draw dead, they could win.
I mean, if South Korea ever hits the second Auctioneer, this game is over, right? Like that is the reality of this situation.
The game is more over than it already is.
Right, and it's pretty over right now. Jade Spirit, Jade Idol, I mean, there's just going to be enormous Jade.
Yeah, I don't think they even need to play the second Jade Idol because they have lethal presented on board. So in
They
case
hold it for the
anything
cycle, yeah.
in case anything crazy happens and they're able to remove this board, you want to make sure you have the cycle. So, Curious Glimmerroot. Well, they're very likely to pick up a Jade Idol.
Would allow them to play that, 3/3?
No, it's what started in your deck. It's not like the Crystalline Oracle, which is just the deck in period. So, I wonder which.
Something that stalls, perhaps? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is tough, right? Like, what... They have to... Shell Shifter, Feral Rage, are they still dead?
Shell Shifter absorbs the 9 attack. No, absorbs the 2/3 and the 3/1. They're still dead. Yeah, because there's 20 damage total represented after that. They'd be able to heal up too, so they'd go up to 21. Oh yeah, they would be alive.
They're alive for one more turn.
They would be alive.
What are they hoping to hit? What are they ever going to do at this point? I don't even know.
Yeah, there's a second swipe in the deck, so they'd be dead to that. But they can go up to 21. Ooh, healing their opponent's face.
Very gentlemanly of them. I think that's a good tacit admission that things are not going well with this Priest deck.
Yeah, and that is going to be South Korea taking the series 3-1. Coming out with the Jade Druid and able to overcome the Priest in game number 4 to take the victory. No ace match needed in this one.
Yeah, very, very well played by South Korea. They had a really good deck lineup here. I think they made very smart choices in what they brought in that lineup. Particularly, I do want to commend again the Control Paladin. I think that was a very smart choice for them. And they got the matchups they were looking for almost all the way through, only losing the single game.
Yeah, very impressive win from them, and it's going to put them, again, this is a much shorter round robin than Phase 1. You only play, it's only 3 weeks long, you only play against the other teams once, and you need that top 2, and then half of the third placers make it through. So getting that first win is actually a really big deal.
Right. I mean, it almost assuredly keeps them off the very, very bottom of the charts. So they're basically in contention no matter what. If they can win another one, they're almost assuredly through.
Yeah, I think they are. I'm sure they do. But there's some crazy math that can happen, especially if all the groups go crazy and then all the third placers are so close. But every group would need an 0-3 at that point.
Yeah, it would be very strange. But yeah, so I mean, this first win was very, very critical.
Yes.
Again, big congratulations to South Korea. They won 3-1. We'll take a look here at what those matchups look like. Argentina shaved off a single game with their Druid deck, but South Korea with 3 convincing wins on Shaman, Paladin, and Druid. I think that's a phenomenal, phenomenal showing from the Korean team.
Yeah, and taking a look at the standings now for that group, South Korea joins the Netherlands. They're tied in game score now at 1-0. And then Argentina and the Philippines. Philippines, sort of barely managed to make it on to Phase 2. Off to a rough start, but again, it's still possible for them. But they're going to need a win next week if they want hopes of making it into Phase 3, which is that pretty important single elimination knockout phase that gets them closer to that spot at the LAN finals.
Yeah, this format definitely means every game matters, and I think this is a clear indication that group where you've got 2 teams tied for first, 2 teams tied for third, you care absolutely about every single game point.
And we actually do have a winner's interview with Kranich from South Korea. Hey, man, can you hear us?
Hey, man. Yes,
Hey.
I can.
Hey, so first off, going into Phase 2, how does it feel to start off with a win?
Well, we have checked our groups in last week, and it felt like our group is kind of pretty tough. But now I'm really glad that at least we guarantee a win today, so it feels fine.
So do things feel at all different from Phase number 1? Have you guys changed any of your preparation? Have you gone back and done any different preparation? Have things changed, or does it just feel sort of the same? You're just playing some more Hearthstone.
But I feel like it's kind of same. I mean, the meta game changes and the decks are changing, but thing is that it is still kind of similar format that we have to get out of our group. So yeah, we're doing pretty same.
Do you guys feel confident that you might be able to advance to potentially the LAN final as one of the top 4 teams? How are you feeling about your chances right now?
Well, I mean, single elimination tournament is kind of really tough. Like nobody knows what will happen. So, but at least we're kind of pretty proud of making it out of our group. So yeah, we'll see.
All right, and last question. If you got to choose one team or one country to play against in the finals, so you make it to the finals and you get to choose which country you play against, which country would you choose to play against?
I mean, it's hard to say because I don't really pay attention to all the other countries in this tournament, and I don't really know what countries are in this 24 team bracket.
The correct answer is USA.
Okay, I take that.
Yeah, okay.
Good choice, good choice.
That would be a great finals. All right, Kranich, congratulations on your win this week, and we'll see you again next week for another Phase 2 match.
Thanks.
That's awesome. Well, again, good luck, obviously, to South Korea in their upcoming matches. We're very excited to see how that goes for them. What do you think, TJ? On the whole, pretty awesome first match for the night?
Yeah, I think so. We got a good amount of variety. We saw some interesting tech choices. We saw a lot of Elise, which I was actually pretty surprised about. There was Elise in 4 of the decks that we saw, or 3 of the decks that we saw. So that's always cool to see. Definitely one of my favorite cards. But we still have 2 more great matches left to come on the night for the Hearthstone Global Games. But we're going to have to go to a very small break before the next match. So don't go anywhere. More Hearthstone action coming right up.